The salt air usually serves as a reset button for my mind, a natural cleanser for the noise of the industry, but today the breeze coming off the harbor smelled less like freedom and more like burnt ambition mixed with cheap, over-applied cologne. I stood on the teak decking of the Ethelgard, a 40-meter vessel that was less of a boat and more of a floating master's thesis in maritime autonomy. My company, Thea Systems, had designed every circuit, written every line of code, and engineered every redundancy protocol that kept this mechanical beast breathing. I wasn't just the owner, I was its architect. I was currently kneeling on the deck, running a complex diagnostic on the port side thruster arrays because the telemetry had been showing a 0.4% variance in response time. Before we dive deeper into how this variance led to the most satisfying corporate takedown of my career, let me know in the comments, what city or country are you watching this from? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, in my world, a 0.4% variance is the difference between a perfect, seamless docking and a multi-million-dollar lawsuit involving a crushed pier. I was dressed for the work, not the prestige. I wore a pair of faded navy coveralls that I've had since my days terminating fiber optic cables in freezing shipyards in Norway, and a beanie that had seen better decades. No makeup, hair wrestled into a messy bun that screamed deadline mode rather than gala-ready. To the untrained eye, I looked like I belonged in the background, scrubbing the fiberglass. To anyone who actually mattered in this industry, I looked like the person who signed the checks. Then I heard him. It started with the heavy, rhythmic thump of footsteps on the gangway, devoid of the hesitation one usually has when boarding a strange vessel. That was followed by a voice that sounded like it had been dipped in trust fund money and dried with a total lack of consequences. "Jesus, it smells like diesel and desperation out here," the voice boomed. It was Brent. Brent, the boy king. The 26-year-old son of the venture capital titan whose firm held a significant, though minority, stake in my company. Brent, a man who thought equity was just a fancy word for his weekly allowance. He came bounding onto the aft deck, sunglasses worth more than my first car perched on his nose, holding a half-empty mimosa despite the fact that it was only 8:30 in the morning. He stopped dead when he saw me kneeling by the access hatch. He didn't look at the tablet in my hand, which was currently streaming live data from the engine room. He didn't look at my face. He looked at the coveralls. He looked at the grease smudge on my cheek. "Hey," he snapped, snapping his fingers aggressively near my face. "You. Cleaner. Whatever." I didn't look up immediately. I finished the code injection on the tablet, watched the green verification light blink twice to confirm the patch was stable, and then slowly rose to my feet. My knees cracked slightly, a reminder of 20 years spent building an empire from the ground up. "Can I help you, Brent?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He blinked, clearly not recognizing me. To him, I was just background texture, an NPC in the video game of his life. The idea that the CEO of the company might be checking her own thrusters was simply outside his bandwidth. "Oh, you know my name? Good. That helps," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "Listen, the cleaning crew was supposed to be gone by 8. I have investors coming at noon. I need this deck spotless. And get me a fresh towel while you're at it. This humidity is making me sweat like a pig." He tossed a dirty rag, which he had evidently picked up from a railing where a previous technician had left it, right at my chest. It hit me with a soft, wet thud, leaving a damp mark on my coveralls before falling to the deck. I looked down at the rag. Then I looked up at Brent. "Get off the boat," I said. "Cleaning ladies only," he shouted over me, laughing at his own wit as he turned to look at a blonde woman who had just boarded behind him. She giggled, a hollow sound that carried on the wind like a warning bell. "Excuse me," I said, my voice dropping that specific octave that usually makes board members sit up straight and check their posture. "You heard me," Brent sneered, stepping closer, invading my personal space with the scent of stale champagne and aggressive entitlement. "I don't want the help hovering. Finish up the toilets or whatever you do and get off. The adults are talking." He gestured grandly to the yacht, sweeping his arm across the horizon as if he'd built the vessel with his bare hands. "This is a premium asset, sweetheart. not a break room for the janitorial staff. My heart didn't shatter. My feelings weren't hurt. Instead, a cold, crystalline clarity washed over me. It was the same feeling I get when I find a critical bug in a competitor's software or a loophole in a contract. It wasn't anger, it was opportunity. I realized in that moment that Brent didn't know. He genuinely didn't know I owned the boat. He didn't know I owned the company that built the boat. He didn't even know who I was. His father, the chairman, handled the high-level strategy and the board meetings. Brent was just the brand ambassador, a title we invented to keep him out of the server rooms where he could do actual damage. He had never bothered to attend the technical briefings. He had never looked at the organizational chart. He saw a middle-aged woman in coveralls, and his brain autocomplete made. I could have fired him on the spot. I could have pulled up my bank account on my phone, or the digital title to the vessel, or simply called his father on speakerphone right there. But that would be too quick. That would be efficient, but it wouldn't be educational. And I believe deeply in education. Understood, I said, my face a mask of neutral obedience. I bent down, picked up the wet rag he'd thrown at me, and folded it neatly. I'll just finish my checks and be out of your hair. Yeah, you do that, he dismissed me, turning his back to take a selfie with the city skyline. And try not to touch the upholstery on your way out. It's Italian leather. I walked toward the gangway, my tablet tucked securely under my arm. As I passed the main security console near the stern, a sleek, black panel flush with the wall, I paused. Blocking my body with my shoulder so Brent couldn't see, I tapped a command sequence that didn't appear on the standard user interface. It was a ghost log. A subroutine I had written years ago for debugging purposes. It activates a passive recording mode, capturing audio and video from every sensor on the ship and storing it in a hidden partition that only I could access. It bypassed the standard security logs that the captain could see. I was leaving the boat physically, but digitally, I was embedding myself into the nervous system of the Ethel Guard. Nice fit, babe, I heard him say to the blonde woman as I stepped onto the dock. My dad practically gave me this boat. I run this whole harbor now. I stopped on the wood planks of the pier, looking back at the gleaming white hull of my creation. The sun reflected off the polished chrome, blindingly bright. He thought he ran the harbor. He thought he owned the boat. He was about to learn that you don't insult the person who holds the remote control. I walked to my car, a sensible, dark gray sedan parked between two bright red Ferraris, and sat in the driver's seat. I didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop, tethered it to the boat's secure Wi-Fi, and watched the live feed from the salon camera. Brent was already spilling his mimosa on the very Italian leather he'd warned me about. To understand the depth of the grave Brent was digging for himself, you have to understand the paperwork. And I know, paperwork sounds about as sexy as a root canal, but in my line of work, the fine print is where the bodies are buried. 6 months ago, Brent's father, Richard, sat across from me in a glass-walled conference room in Seattle. Richard is a shark, but he's an old-school shark. He understands leverage and he understands respect. He wanted a flagship vessel to show off the VC firm's portfolio. He wanted the Ethel Guard to be the face of their maritime investment division. Specifically, he wanted Brent to have a project. He needs responsibility, Yvonne, Richard had said, looking tired, the lines around his eyes deep with the exhaustion of managing a disappointing heir. He needs to feel like he's running something tangible, not just spreadsheets. Iron, steel, water. You want me to give him my prototype? I asked, sipping an espresso that cost more than my first hour of wages back in the day. Not give, Richard corrected quickly. We structure it as a long-term lease for marketing purposes. He becomes the operating manager of the vessel for corporate events. It makes him look like a heavy hitter. It's good for the firm's image, and frankly, it keeps him out of the actual office where he breaks things. I had paused. I knew Brent. I knew he was a liability wrapped in a polo shirt. But I also knew that Thea Systems needed the VC firm's next round of funding to expand into the Asian market. It was a calculated risk. Fine, I said. But the title stays with me. The insurance stays with me. And the systems administration, that stays with Thea Systems. He gets user-level access. He can steer. He can plan parties. He can dock. but he doesn't touch the root code. Richard had waved his hand dismissively. He doesn't know code from calligraphy. He just wants to blow the horn and host cocktail parties. It's a deal. We signed the papers. The document was 80 pages long. Page 72, paragraph 4, subsection C, contained a clause I had inserted personally. It was the owner override protocol. It stated that in the event of misuse, safety violations, or reputational damage, the legal owner, me, retained the right to assume immediate and total control of the vessel's navigation and operational systems remotely or on-site, without prior notice. Richard didn't read page 72. He just wanted his son out of his hair. Brent definitely didn't read it. He just saw the shiny keys. Back in the present, I drove home and went straight to my home office, a room lined with monitors that looked more like NASA mission control than a study. I pulled up the legal scans just to reassure myself. Brent thought the boat was a gift. He told everyone it was his personal yacht. He posted it on Instagram with captions like #selfmade and #bosslife. He didn't realize he was essentially driving a rental car where the landlord could kill the engine if he smoked inside. On my screen, the Ethal Guard's internal systems were humming. I could see the fuel levels, the battery charge, the freshwater tank status. Thanks to the ghost log I initiated earlier, I could hear everything happening on the bridge. Dad just doesn't get it. Brent's voice came through my speakers, crystal clear. He was pacing the bridge, talking to someone on speakerphone. Yvonne is dead weight. She's old tech. Who cares about redundancy protocols? We need Flash. We need AI integration. We need to pivot. I leaned in closer to the monitor. Pivot. The favorite word of people who have no idea where they're going. I'm telling you, Brent continued, presumably talking to one of his frat brothers who had failed upward into finance. I'm going to push her out. The board loves me. The demo next week? I'm going to present a new vision. My vision. And once I show them how much money we're wasting on our safety standards, she's toast. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. So that was it. It wasn't just disrespect on the dock. It was a coup. He wasn't just treating me like a maid. He was actively plotting to remove me from the company I built from a garage startup into a global leader. He was going to use my boat at my demo to convince my investors that I was obsolete. I looked at the Grant Admin Access button on my screen. I could lock him out right now. I could turn off the lights, lock the cabin doors, and blast polka music over the PA system until he cried. It would be funny. It would be satisfying. But that was reactive. That was emotional. Yvonne doesn't do emotional. Yvonne does strategic demolition. He wanted to present a new vision at the demo. Fine. I would make sure he had the most memorable demo of his life. I opened a terminal window and began typing. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was preparing the stage. If he wanted to play captain, I was going to let him. I was going to let him sail right into the middle of the ocean, metaphorically speaking, before I pulled the plug. I checked the guest list for the upcoming event on Friday. Top-tier tech bloggers, 2 senators, the entire board of directors. Perfect. The audience for his execution would be standing room only. Over the next 3 days, I became a ghost in my own machine. I didn't step foot on the Ethal Guard, but I lived there. Through the high-definition security cameras and the bridge microphones, I watched Brent turn my masterpiece of engineering into a floating fraternity house. He hosted a pre-launch brunch that involved 3 crates of champagne and a DJ who seemed to think bass was a substitute for talent. I watched as ash from his cigars drifted onto the teak, my hand-oiled teak. I watched as high heels dug into the soft decking. I logged every single infraction, not for insurance purposes, but for the moral dossier I was compiling. But the physical damage was nothing compared to the verbal garbage he was spewing. On Tuesday, he brought a group of potential angel investors aboard. They were mostly kids in hoodies who had gotten lucky with crypto, looking for the next shiny thing. So, who handles the tech stack? One of them asked, pointing to the helm displays. This interface is slick. Oh, I supervised the whole UI overhaul, Brent lied, leaning back in the captain's chair with his feet up on the console. We had some legacy engineers, the old guard who wanted to keep it clunky. I had to step in and streamline everything. The main engineer, Yvonne? She's basically a dinosaur. Great for paperwork, but she doesn't get the user journey. I sat in my office sipping green tea, my knuckles white around the ceramic mug. Dinosaur. I wrote the kernel for that operating system in a basement while he was still learning not to eat paste. Later that afternoon, I had to physically go to the marina to sign off on a fuel delivery, a regulatory requirement that needed the owner's signature. I wore a blazer this time, trying to look the part of the executive I was. Brent intercepted me on the dock. He was with a woman, not the blonde from before, but a different one. This one was a brunette holding a Pomeranian. "Hey you," he shouted. I stopped. "Hello, Brent. Did you restock the bar? I told you specifically I needed the Japanese whiskey." "I'm not the provisioner, Brent," I said calmly. "I'm here for the fuel manifest." He rolled his eyes and turned to the brunette. "See what I mean? Impossible to get good help. You give them a job and they give you excuses." He turned back to me. "Just grab a napkin, will you? Someone spilled red wine in the salon. It's sticky." He held out a crumpled napkin he had in his pocket. The brunette looked at me, then at him, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Babe, I think she's fine," Brent interrupted. "Go on, chop chop. You have a sunset cruise to catch." I took the napkin. I actually took it. It felt like holding a live grenade. "I'll see to it," I said. My voice was so level it was almost robotic. I walked past him onto the boat. I went to the salon. There was indeed a wine stain on the cream carpet. I didn't clean it. Instead, I took a photo of it. Then I took a photo of the empty whiskey bottles scattered on the table. I took a photo of the confidential company documents he had left lying open on the sofa, documents detailing the Q3 projections. This was a security violation of the highest order, leaving sensitive IP out in the open. That was grounds for immediate termination of his access privileges under corporate bylaws. But I didn't trigger the alarm. I just documented it. As I was leaving, I ran into one of the older investors named Mr. Henderson. He had known me for 10 years. He looked at the napkin in my hand, then at the chaotic salon, then at me. "Yvonne," he said softly. I apologize for the atmosphere. Richard's boy is spirited." "He's certainly that," I said. Are you letting this happen?" Henderson asked, his eyes shrewd. He knew me. He knew I didn't tolerate incompetence. I smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. "I'm just letting the data accumulate, Arthur. You know I believe in a large sample size before making a decision." He nodded slowly. "I see. Well, I'll make sure to wear a life jacket to the demo on Friday." "You do that," I said. "And maybe stay near the gangway." I walked off the boat, tossing the napkin into the trash bin on the dock. The bin was labeled refuse. Fitting. The trap was set, but he still had room to hang himself higher. I needed to ensure that when the fall came, it wasn't just a stumble, it was a plummet. Wednesday brought the rain, and with it, the dark, suffocating clouds of corporate espionage. I wasn't at the marina that morning. I was at the Thea Systems headquarters, a glass monolith overlooking the gray, churning waters of the Puget Sound. My office is usually a sanctuary of silence, a place of clean lines, whiteboards filled with algorithmic flowcharts, and the hum of high-end filtration systems. But today, the air felt heavy, charged with static electricity and impending betrayal. I sat at my desk, staring out at the rain streaking the floor-to-ceiling glass, turning the world outside into a watercolor blur. I had called in Sarah, a junior board member whom I had mentored since she was a terrified intern fetching coffee. Sarah was sharp, loyal, and possessed the kind of quiet intelligence that made her invisible to men like Brent. To him, she was just another piece of office furniture, a notebook with legs. To me, she was the eyes and ears inside the boardroom when I was busy in the server room. "It's worse than you think, Yvonne," Sarah said, sitting on the edge of the leather sofa. She was clutching her tablet like a shield, her knuckles white. "Tell me," I said, not turning away from the window. I watched a ferry cut through the gloom in the distance, steady and reliable. "He's circulating a memo to the entire board," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He's calling it Project Fresh Sail." I slowly turned my chair around. Project Fresh Sail sounds like a laundry detergent. It's a restructuring plan, Sarah whispered, tapping the screen of her tablet and sliding it across the mahogany desk toward me. He's claiming that your obsession with safety and redundancy is costing the company 15% in potential margins. He has charts, Yvonne. Fake charts. He's comparing our development cycle to mobile app developers, not maritime engineering firms. He's saying we're too slow. He's saying we're bleeding momentum. I picked up the tablet. The graphics were slick, colorful, and completely fabricated. We build ships that survive hurricanes, I said, my voice hardening into steel. Not dating apps that crash when too many people log on. He doesn't care, Sarah continued, leaning forward. He's lined up the votes. The two new VC guys? They're with him. They want a quick exit. They want to pump the stock, slash the QA budget, strip the assets, and sell to the highest bidder by next fiscal year. And the kicker, he wants to announce the leadership transition at the Friday demo. On the yacht. My yacht. I felt a cold fire ignite deep in my stomach. It wasn't the hot flush of embarrassment, it was the freezing burn of liquid nitrogen. He wasn't just going to push me out. He was going to do it on the very vessel I had designed, standing on the deck I paid for, holding the microphone I bought, and telling the world that I was obsolete. He's accusing you of failure to scale, Sarah whispered. That's the specific legal term he's using to trigger the competency clause in your contract. Failure to scale, I repeated, tasting the words. They tasted like ash. I stood up and walked over to the architectural model of the Ethel Guard displayed on a pedestal in the corner of the room. I ran a finger along the miniature hull. He thinks scale is just making things bigger and faster. He forgets that scale without stability is just a disaster waiting to happen. I looked back at Sarah. Does he know you're here? No, she said quickly. He thinks I'm ordering the catering for the party. He wants a chocolate fountain. Good. Keep ordering, I said. Make sure he has everything he wants. Give him the chocolate fountain. Give him the champagne. Give him the rope, Sarah. Give him miles of it. What are you going to do? She asked, her eyes wide. I sat back down at my computer, the 3 wide monitors glowing with the blue light of the terminal command line. I pulled up the system architecture for the Ethel Guard. I'm going to introduce him to a little concept called admin privileges. I spent the rest of the night in the server room, 2 floors down. It was a cold, windowless fortress of humming racks and blinking LEDs. This was my church. I wasn't writing a rebuttal memo. I wasn't calling expensive lawyers to draft cease and desist letters. I was coding. I dug into the deepest, darkest layers of the yacht's operating system. I bypassed the user interface, bypassed the safety subroutines, and went straight to the kernel. Brent wanted to talk about user experience? I was going to give him a user experience he would never forget. I found the file labeled demo_mode.exe, the standard presentation preset we used for showing off the boat's features to prospective buyers. I opened it. I rewrote the script. I didn't delete the old code, that would be vandalism. I just added a conditional loop, a trapdoor hidden beneath the digital floorboards. If user equals guest_admin_Brent and location equals harbor_coordinates, then execute protocol dead_water. I saved the file. I compiled the patch. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, a staccato rhythm of retribution. I uploaded the patch to the yacht server via the encrypted satellite link. On my screen, a small green loading bar filled up slowly. 98%. 99%. 100%. Update complete. I leaned back, cracking my neck. I legally filed the update in our internal changelog as Critical Security Compliance Patch 4.2. The description read, Enhanced Remote Intervention Capabilities for Unauthorized Operator Scenarios. It was the truth. It was the absolute, unvarnished legal truth. If Brent's team had bothered to read the technical change logs, they would have seen it. They would have asked questions. But men like Brent don't read change logs. They just want to sail. I went home at 3 a.m. I slept like a baby. Thursday was the dress rehearsal, the calm before the chaos. I arrived at the office late, fueled by a double espresso and the grim satisfaction of a plan in motion. My head of engineering, Marcus, was waiting for me in the lab. Marcus is a man of few words, a former Navy systems specialist who treats code with religious reverence. He knew what was happening. The rumor mill in a tech company travels faster than light, and loyalty in the trenches runs deep. The patch is live, Marcus said, not looking up from his soldering station where he was repairing a circuit board. Any glitches? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. None. Latency is 0. The override command is mapped to your personal key fob. We also routed a secondary trigger to your phone app, just in case. He finally looked up, his eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. You know, if you do this, the PR fallout will be significant. The PR fallout of letting a toddler steer the company into an iceberg would be worse, I replied. True. Marcus cracked a rare, crooked smile. He called me this morning, by the way. Asked if we could install a party mode for the deck lights. Wanted them to pulse with the bass of the music. Let me guess, I said. You told him it wasn't possible? I told him it would require a hardware refit, Marcus said. But I did enable the external speakers to override the interior sound system. You know, for safety announcements. Good thinking, Marcus. So, we're doing this? He asked, his voice low. I looked at the schematic of the Ethal Guard pinned to the wall. We're not doing anything, Marcus. The system is just functioning as designed. If an unauthorized entity tries to hijack the vessel protects itself. That's not sabotage. That's a feature. I left the office early and drove to the marina one last time. The yacht was buzzing with frantic activity. Caterers were loading crates of lobster on dollies. Florists were carrying massive arrangements of white lilies that cost more than my mortgage. A massive banner was being strung up across the stern. Thea Systems, the future is now. Brent was on the bow, directing the placement of a portable stage. He was wearing a captain's hat. An actual, irony-free captain's hat with gold braiding. It took every ounce of my self-control not to laugh. I walked up to the edge of the dock. I didn't board. I just stood there, watching. Brent spotted me. He jogged over, looking flushed and manic, his sunglasses pushed up into his hair. Yvonne. Just the person I didn't want to see. He laughed, a loud, barking sound, and slapped me on the shoulder. Look, I know things have been tense, but tomorrow is going to be huge. Huge. And don't worry, I'll mention you in the speech. Thanks to the legacy team for laying the foundation, something like that. That's very generous of you, Brent, I said. Yeah, well, I'm a generous guy. He lowered his voice, leaning in conspiratorially. Hey, look, for the event tomorrow, maybe you should just enjoy it from the shore. We're at capacity with the VIPs, and, honestly, having the technical staff looming around kind of kills the vibe. You get it, right? He was uninviting me to the launch of my own ship. I get it, I said, my face a mask of polite understanding. Too technical. Might bore people. Exactly. He pointed a finger gun at me. You're a genius, Yvonne. Really. But you're, back-end. We need front-end energy tomorrow. Front-end energy, I repeated. Cool. So, take the day off. Go to a spa or something. Treat yourself on the company card. He winked and ran back to the stage, shouting at a caterer who had dropped a fork. I stood there for a moment, watching the water lap against the hull. The Ethal Guard bobbed gently, a sleeping giant waiting for its command. Sleep well, I whispered to the boat. Tomorrow, we wake up. I reached into my pocket and touched the small plastic key fob Marcus had given me. It looked like a garage door opener. It felt like Thor's hammer. I turned and walked away. I didn't go to a spa. I went home and laid out my outfit for tomorrow. Not coveralls, not a blazer. I chose a simple black turtleneck and dark jeans. Steve Jobs meets a cat burglar. I wanted to disappear until the moment I made everyone see me. The stage was set. The actors were in place. The script had been rewritten. All that was left was for the curtain to rise. Friday noon. The sun was high, the sky was a perfect, innocent blue, and the marina was swarming with the kind of people who use the word synergy unironically. I arrived 20 minutes after the start time. I parked my car at the far end of the lot, wedged between a hedge and a dumpster, and walked past the rows of luxury vehicles. I could hear the music before I saw the boat. A thumping, generic house beat that vibrated in your chest. The Ethal guard looked magnificent, I had to admit. It was gleaming white, decked out in flags and banners. A red carpet led up the gangway. Security guards with earpieces checked names on iPads, looking serious and important. I walked up to the checkpoint. The guard was a burly guy named Mike, whom I'd hired 3 years ago. He looked at me, then at his list, then back at me. "Miss Yvonne," he said, lowering his voice. "You're not on the list." "I know, Mike," I said, keeping my face blank. "Brent's oversight. I just need to check the aft cabling before they cast off." "Safety protocol." Mike hesitated. He knew who signed his paycheck, but he also knew who was currently screaming into a microphone on the deck. 5 minutes, Mike said, stepping aside and unhooking the velvet rope. "Stay out of the camera angles." "You're a gem, Mike." I slipped on board. The deck was crowded with beautiful people holding champagne flutes. The air smelled of expensive perfume, ozone, and the faint, sweet scent of diesel. I weaved through the crowd, invisible in my black outfit. I was the shadow in their bright, shiny world. I found a spot near the rear winch controls, partially obscured by a stack of massive speakers. From here, I had a clear view of the makeshift stage on the upper deck. Brent was holding court. He had a microphone in one hand and a glass of scotch in the other. He looked flushed, sweaty, and ecstatic. "Welcome, everyone," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the neighboring hulls. "Welcome to the future of Thea Systems." Applause rippled through the crowd. The 2 new board members were clapping the loudest, nodding like bobbleheads. "For years," Brent continued, pacing the stage, "this company has been great. But great is the enemy of legendary. We've been too safe, too slow, too focused on what can go wrong instead of what can go right." I watched the crowd. A few of the senior engineers in the back looked uncomfortable. They stared at their shoes. They knew that focusing on what can go wrong is literally the job description when you're building autonomous vehicles that weigh 40 tons. Today, Brent yelled, "We are launching a new era. No more red tape. No more hesitation. We are untethering ourselves from the past." He pointed dramatically at the horizon. "In a few minutes, we're going to take this beauty out for a spin. We're going to show you speed. We're going to show you agility. And we're going to show you who's really in charge." The crowd cheered. He was loving it. He was high on the fumes of his own ego. He looked down, scanning the adoring masses, and then he saw me. I was standing by the winch, arms crossed. For a second, his smile faltered. He covered the mic with his hand and hissed at a nearby assistant. I saw him mouth the words, asterisk, "I thought I told her to leave. Get security, asterisk." He glared at me. I didn't look away. I just stared at him, my expression completely neutral. It was the stare of a scientist observing a lab rat running towards the cheese, unaware of the electric grid beneath its feet. A security guard started moving towards me through the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brent shouted, drawing attention back to himself. "Let's get this party started. Crew, prepare to cast off." He looked at me one last time, a smirk returning to his face. He waved shooing motion. "Time to leave, sweetheart. The ship is sailing." "Yes," I murmured to myself, my hand closing around the fob in my pocket. "It certainly is." I stepped back onto the gangway, moving with purposeful slowness. The guard stopped, seeing I was leaving voluntarily. "Bye now." Brent laughed over the PA system. "Don't wait up." I walked down the ramp and onto the solid wood of the dock. I turned around. The crew began to untie the ropes. The thick hawsers splashed into the water. The Ethal guard was free. Brent revved the engines. A plume of white water churned at the stern. The yacht began to drift away from the dock, the music pumping, the crowd cheering. I stood alone on the pier. The gap between the boat and the dock grew. 5 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet. I pulled the fob out of my pocket. It was a small, unassuming black rectangle with a single red button. "Hello, reality," I said. And I pressed the button. There is a specific, undeniable physics to a 40-meter yacht leaving a dock. It is not like a car slamming on the brakes. You cannot simply halt 40 tons of displacement with a screech of rubber on asphalt. It is a massive, majestic slide of momentum, a heavy grace that demands respect. But when you strip away the propulsion, that grace turns into something far more terrifying for a sailor: dead weight. I held the button down for a full second, feeling the tactile click of the industrial-grade switch beneath my thumb. It was a small movement, barely visible to the hundreds of people cheering on the dock, but in the invisible world of radio frequencies and encrypted data, I had just swung a sledgehammer. The signal traveled from my hand, arcing through the air on a secure frequency, hitting the receiver on the mast of the Ethel Guard. It cascaded down through the fiber-optic nervous system I had installed with my own hands, bypassing the bridge controls, bypassing the manual overrides, and striking straight into the engine control unit. Asterisk command received. Dead water. Priority Alpha. Override all user inputs. Action. Immediate shutdown. Asterisk. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a crash. It was silence. The deep, throaty roar of the twin diesel engines, the heartbeat of the vessel, cut out instantly. The churning white water at the stern, which had been frothing like a jacuzzi, went flat in the span of a breath. The vibration that hummed through the deck plates, the subtle tremble of power that every sailor feels in their boots, vanished. But I didn't stop at the engines. The dead water protocol was comprehensive. It was designed for a worst-case scenario where the ship had been hijacked by hostile actors. The thumping bass of the house music died mid-beat, leaving a sudden, ringing void in the air. The strobe lights and the synchronized LED party mode I had begrudgingly authorized flickered once and went black. The spinning radar array on the roof froze. Even the electric sliding glass doors to the main salon locked in place with a mechanical thunk. The Ethel Guard transformed from a predator of the seas into a 40-ton cork, bobbing aimlessly in the harbor channel. On the bridge, the effect was kinetic. I saw Brent lurch forward, his body still anticipating the acceleration that had just been stolen from him. He slammed into the console, catching himself on the leather-wrapped dashboard. He shoved the dual throttle levers forward, his knuckles white. Nothing. He yanked them back to neutral and slammed them forward again, a child playing with a broken toy. Nothing. Because the music had cut out, the sound of his confusion carried across the water with embarrassing clarity. What the hell? Hey, why did the music stop? Get the generator back online. The yacht continued to drift. It still had forward momentum, carrying it lazily toward the center of the channel, but without the stabilizers active, it began to list slightly to the port side. It wasn't a dangerous list, just enough to be uncomfortable, just enough to spill the drinks of the VIPs standing on the upper deck. I stood on the dock, my arms crossed, the fob hidden in my palm. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't gloating. I was observing data points. The boat was drifting toward a mudbank on the far side of the marina exit. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was the ultimate maritime humiliation. Engine room, report. Brent screamed into the intercom handset. He waited, shaking the device. Engine room. Are you deaf? He was screaming into a piece of dead plastic. I had disabled the internal comms too. He was the captain of absolutely nothing. And then, the panic began to set in. Panic on a luxury yacht doesn't look like panic on the Titanic. There is no screaming about icebergs or lifeboats yet. It is a slow, dawning realization of inconvenience that curdles into fear. First, it was the air conditioning. The Ethel Guard is effectively a massive greenhouse, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass. Under the midday sun, without the AC compressors running, the temperature inside the salon began to spike immediately. The board members in their expensive Italian suits started to pull at their collars. Then, the realization that the toilets wouldn't flush. The vacuum pumps were offline. Then, the realization that the champagne fridge was warming up. But on the bridge, the fear was primal. I pulled out my phone and opened the Ghost Log app, tapping into the bridge microphone I had kept active on a separate, battery backup circuit. I needed to hear this. It's dead. Everything is dead, a voice said. It was Steve, the actual captain, the man Brent had shoved aside to play pretend. I have no steering. I have no comms. The rudder is locked at 5 degrees port. We are drifting. Fix it, Brent shrieked. His voice cracked, losing all of its smooth, trust fund baritone. Reboot it. Do the thing. The Control-Alt-Delete. "I can't," Steve yelled back, and I could hear the vindication in his voice. "The system is locked out. Look at the screen. It says admin override active." "Who has admin access?" Brent yelled. "I do. I'm the admin. Put in my code." "It's not accepting your code, sir," Steve replied, his voice level. "It says user unauthorized." User unauthorized. Two beautiful words. The yacht was now drifting sideways, presenting its broadside to the waiting press corps on the shore. It looked like a dead whale, helpless in the current. I saw the guests starting to crowd the rails, their faces pale. They were pointing at the shore, then pointing at the water, realizing that the gap was too wide to jump but too short to ignore. The illusion of the high-speed future had shattered. Now, they were just rich people stuck on a hot barge. Brent ran out from the bridge to the deck railing. He looked wild. His captain's hat was crooked. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he tried to unlock it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Incoming call, Brent." I let it ring. He pulled the phone away from his ear, stared at it, shook it as if the signal was the problem, and dialed again. My phone buzzed again. I let it ring. He looked at the screen, then he looked up at the shore. He scanned the crowd of photographers and onlookers, his eyes darting frantically. And then he saw me. I hadn't moved an inch. I was the only person on the dock who wasn't holding a camera or whispering to a neighbor. I was standing perfectly still, a statue in black denim, looking straight at him. He squinted against the glare of the sun. Then his eyes went wide. He pointed at me. "You," he screamed. The sound barely carried over the water, thin and pathetic, but I read his lips perfectly. I raised my hand slowly. I held up the black key fob, turning it so the sun caught the matte plastic. I saw him freeze. I saw the gears turn in his head. He understood. Finally, in his lizard brain, the connection was made. The cleaning lady. The tech dinosaur. The woman he had kicked off her own boat. The woman he had called a maid. He started screaming at the people around him, gesturing wildly toward the dock. "She did it. It's her. She sabotaged us. Arrest her." But no one was looking at me. They were looking at the boat that was slowly rotating in the current, drifting dangerously close to the marker buoy. I tapped my earpiece phone. I dialed a number I had saved long ago, the harbor master's public frequency, which was currently being blasted over the marina's loudspeakers for the event commentary. "Harbor Control," a voice crackled, amplified across the entire marina. "This is Yvonne Vance," I said, my voice calm, authoritative, and magnified by the loudspeakers to every corner of the docks. "Owner of the vessel Ethelgard. I am declaring a navigation hazard in Sector 4. The crowd on the dock went silent. The reporters lowered their cameras for a split second, then raised them again, sensing the shift in the narrative. "Miss Vance," the harbor master's voice boomed back, confused. "We have the vessel in sight. It appears dead in the water." "That is correct," I said, articulating every syllable. "The vessel has been remotely disabled due to unauthorized operation by unqualified personnel. I am requesting a tow tug for retrieval immediately. Asterisk unauthorized operation. Unqualified personnel. Asterisk." The words hung in the air like smoke. Everyone heard it. The press heard it. The investors sweating through their shirts on the boat heard it. I watched Brent slump against the railing. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a vase he was told not to touch. The Ethelgard drifted silently, a floating monument to his failure. It was time to finish this. The press loves a disaster, but they love a scoop even more. As the rusty, orange tugboats chugged out from the service bay to retrieve the lifeless luxury yacht, the reporters turned their cameras away from the water and toward me. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I walked over to the podium that had been set up for Brent's post-sale celebration. The banner behind it read "The future is now." The microphone was still live. I stepped up to it. Feedback whined for a second, a piercing shriek that made the crowd wince, then it cleared. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began. My voice was steady, echoing off the hulls of the nearby ships. "I apologize for the interruption to your afternoon." The cameras flashed. 100 shutters clicked in unison, focusing on the woman in the black turtleneck. There has been some confusion regarding the leadership and direction of Thea Systems, I said, looking directly into the lens of the nearest TV camera. I was told that today was a launch of a new era. And in a way, it is. I pulled out my tablet and connected it to the HDMI cable that fed the large display screen behind the stage, the screen Brent had intended to use for his victory lap. The man currently drifting in the bay, I said, pointing a thumb over my shoulder where the Ethal guard was being ignominiously hooked up to a tow line, believed that innovation means ignoring the foundation. He believed that safety protocols were red tape and that experience was obsolete. I tapped the screen. The ghost log data appeared. It wasn't subtle. First, the audio file played. Brent's voice, clear and arrogant, boomed over the speakers. Ivan is dead weight. I'm going to push her out. She's basically a dinosaur. The crowd gasped. Then, the video files. The footage of him spilling whiskey on the master console. The footage of him leaving confidential IP documents scattered on the sofa next to an open window. Maritime engineering is not a game, I continued, my voice hardening into steel. The ocean does not care about your stock price. It does not care about your Instagram following. It cares about competence. And when you remove competence from the equation, you get that. I gestured to the dead ship, now being dragged sideways by the tugboat, looking utterly defeated. I designed that vessel. I own that vessel. And today, I demonstrated a new security feature. The incompetence lockout. If the system detects an operator who poses a risk to the ship or the company, it shuts down. Today, the system worked perfectly. I looked directly at the group of board members who were now disembarking the towed yacht, looking furious and humiliated. To the board of directors currently sweating on that deck, you have a choice. You can back the visionary who forgot to check if he had admin access. Or you can back the engineer who holds the keys. I held up the fob one last time. I'll be in my office. We have work to do. I dropped the mic literally. It made a satisfying, heavy thud on the stage floor. I walked away. I didn't look back at the boat. I didn't look at Brent. I later heard he was crying as the tugboat hauled him onto the dock, blaming the humidity for his red eyes. The aftermath was swift and surgical. By the time the Ethal guard was fully docked and powered down, the video of my speech had gone viral. Hashtag incompetence lockout was trending worldwide. The stock price took a dip for exactly 2 hours, then skyrocketed as investors realized that the company was run by someone who could remotely neutralize a threat in seconds. Brent's father, Richard, called me at 6 p.m. that evening. I was sitting in my office, watching the rain streak the glass, a fresh cup of tea in my hand. You embarrass the firm, Richard said, his voice icy. Your son embarrassed the firm, I corrected, not looking up from my monitor. I saved the asset. Imagine if he had crashed it into the break wall? Imagine the lawsuit then. He's my son, Yvonne. And Thea is my company, I replied. If you want to keep your shares, Richard, Brent is out. Effective immediately. And you resign as chairman. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, weighing his pride against his portfolio. He was a shark, but sharks know when they are bleeding. Send over the papers, he sighed. Brent was escorted off the premises the next morning by Mike, the same security guard who had let me onto the boat. He left through a side gate, holding a box of personal items, soaked in sweat and shame. His reputation was in tatters. The last I heard, he's trying to start a crypto podcast about alpha mindsets. It has 12 listeners, and I'm pretty sure 6 of them are bots. I'm back at the helm now. The Ethal guard is currently undergoing a deep clean. Getting the stain of mediocrity out of the carpets takes time, and the smell of stale champagne and cheap cologne lingers longer than you'd think. But the system is secure. The code is clean. The course is set, and the captain? She's right where she belongs. Some lessons only show up after the emails stop and the lights go out. This one was worth staying late for. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed seeing competence win for a change, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the edge of the corporate world. See you in the next one.